I remember at a very young age leafing through books and kind of going and seeing what was around it, always coming across these George Catlin paintings and a lot of different types of Native American studies, Native American history books. Like this scene in particular right here of the stickball players kind of all out. Being Native American and kind of growing up back and forth between Kansas and New Mexico, especially spending most of the year in Kansas, I wasn't always around other Native Americans. And so when I looked at this type of work, I was always imagining like, oh, that's what everybody's doing back on the reservation in New Mexico when I'm not there. Like something like that, you know, that they're just having a lot of fun and kind of good things are going on. So in those types of ways, it really formed my identity of the way Native life was supposed to be, which is really ironic now that I'm older and I was a major in Native American Studies at Dartmouth, and so I kind of know the history behind these paintings more and how inaccurate they are and how, you know, Catlin took a lot of liberties in what he was doing. We were talking about that earlier. And romantic they are, and, you know, stereotypical in a lot of different kind of ways now. But in the beginning, it really kind of formed this identity that, that I kind of was living kind of without at certain times. And without a mother, kind of growing up, I was forming the idea of what it meant to be a Native woman at the same time on my own. And a lot of that was influenced by books that I read, by things that I saw, and not necessarily accurate things that I saw. This idea of having an identity that was formed kind of by the outside, and I think that really plays a role in the work that I make now, and I try to make, because I'm always thinking about kind of the viewer and the artist and that relationship. You know, starting to understand the idea of stereotypes more and what it meant to kind of create your own identity and questioning who you are and kind of going through all those kind of like adolescent type kind of phases. I was also noticing my dad's interaction as a Native artist with the outside world. He makes jewelry, and he does contemporary Navajo jewelry. And I always noticed how people were kind of dismissive in some ways to his explanation for things, or kind of when he talked about the history of things, and they always wanted him to talk about the kind of the romantic side of what he was doing and the romantic side of his identity. He was always around other artists as well, painters, sculptors, potters, rug makers. And so I began to see a lot of what was going on within the Native art world. And so I was actually a big science and math nerd when I went to college. And when I went to college, I thought, oh, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to, do microbiology and have all these ideas and stuff. But then I started taking art classes, and art was, had always been there because it had always been a part of my life with my dad. But I soon started, taking all these art classes, and that became one of my majors, my double major of Native American Studies. And taking, kind of doing both of those things at the same time really influenced one another, because I was seeing, where Native American art history had stalled out kind of in the 40s and 50s, and how there wasn't much that was going on beyond that. If much was going on beyond, there in the 90s, it was like maybe a handful of artists. And when I was at college, I learned about the trajectories of Latin American art, of African American art, of all these different other, minority groups who had done, performance art and video, and I was wondering where those things were for us. And so that's when I really started to make work, because I saw this gap, and I wanted us to catch up and to be in that conversation, in that dialogue with contemporary art, and that's really what compelled me to kind of move ahead. And so this was actually from my first sculpture class I ever took. This is a piece that I did that, we were just supposed to build a simple sculpture, and I ended up doing an entire body cast myself, which was actually, influenced by some of the Catlin paintings where he did the Sundance. He did some paintings of the Sundance ceremony and ritual, where people are kind of strung up, and it's a very private ceremony, and a very, like in terms of non-natives usually don't go to these types of things, and people don't take photographs or anything. And so this was something that was very private. You can see it wasn't something that I showed in a gallery. It was in the stairwell of the Native American house that I made it. And, I was even, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to document, because for me, in a way, this was a ceremonial piece that had a lot to do with prayer and about just kind of creating something new and fresh. But for me, it's always never just been about making art for people to see, but making art because I needed to make it. And for this piece, that was really what it was about. and this was my first kind of delve into creating something that was just not only about making an object, but about thinking about space and thinking about the conceptual ties to, of art making, but also of kind of Native American art.